Hi, everyone. My name is Haley Mankey, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. It's noon now, so we're going to get started. As I do the intro, I'm sure a few more people will trickle in. Welcome to the second week of our Home on the Range webinar series hosted by the BC chapter of the Society for Range Management. We're really excited everyone is joining us today, and we have an exciting presentation lined up for you. Before we get into the presentation though, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what to expect. So once the presentation starts, you can use the chat feature to ask any questions you have, but we will address all of the questions at the end of the presentation. After the 15 to 20 minute presentation, there'll be an opportunity for you guys to turn on your mics if you have anything you would like to ask out loud, or you can use the chat and I will read it out. We really encourage questions and discussion because it really helps with our connection with each other and learning from the presentations. One other thing I want to touch on quickly is how to use Zoom. So if you're not familiar with the platform, in the bottom left-hand corner, there is a mute and start and stop video button. With that, I may mute people during the presentation if there's too much background noise. So if you want to ask a question out loud, just make sure you come off mute before you speak. The other important button to note is in the middle of your screen on the bottom, there's a chat button. If you click that, you'll be able to access the chat feature. And lastly, in the top right corner of your screen, there's a little view button. There you'll be able to adjust if you just want to see the speaker in the presentation, or if you want to see a little bit of everyone who has their video on and so forth. So you can select your viewing preferences there. So without further adu, we're going to get into our presentation for today. So I'm really excited to introduce Lina Aoyama, who is going to be presenting on a presentation titled Restore into the Future, Selecting Plant Material for Post-Fire Restoration in the Great Basin. So Lina has a master's degree in rangeland management from UC Berkeley and is a PhD candidate in the Environmental Studies program at the University of Oregon. She is a grassland ecologist who studies grasslands across the West Coast, from annual grasslands in California to the mountain meadows in the Cascade, and even the sagebush steppe in the Great Basin. She takes a multidisciplinary approach to research with an aim to produce usable science for management. Today, she will talk to us about seed selection for post-fire restoration in the Great Basin. I'm really excited for this presentation, Lina. I know we've had a wild fire season here in British Columbia, and so this is a really timely presentation for those of us who are attending from BC. So without any more delay, let's get started. Thanks for joining us, Lina.
Thanks for the welcome, Haley. Thanks. My name is Lina, and I am probably new to many of you in this room. I have been in Oregon for 3 years now, and I'm excited to share my research I've been doing with my advisor, Lauren Hallett. My talk today is part of my dissertation, and it's an ongoing process, and it's not complete, but I'm happy to share my early results. So the demand for ecosystem restoration efforts are increasing across the globe, and this is no different in the Pacific Northwest. In recent years, we have seen a number of large catastrophic wildfires called megafires ravaged through our rangelands. And this is a figure produced by the Rangeland Analysis Platform. It shows the total area of rangelands burned each year in the Great Basin. And bars are color-coded to display how much of that area was in each fire probability category. As you can see, we're experiencing larger and more frequent wildfires than ever before, and the overwhelming majority of the wildfires occurring in this area are in the high fire probability area, represented by the warm colors. After these wildfire events, range managers like yourself are hard at work revegetating burned areas with perennial grass species. And these efforts take a lot of money and labor, because you use helicopters or mechanical drills to seed vast areas. Because they're expensive, we want to make sure that these restoration projects yield successful outcomes. Now, let's think about what we're restoring to. We generally rely on historical reference sites or the vegetation community before the fire, and we aim to transform burned areas closer to the reference sites. But this practice is based on a view that the reference sites are static and not changing. We now know that climate change is affecting our systems. It is now time to adjust our framework accordingly. The two figures on the right are borrowed from the 4th Oregon Climate Assessment Report published in 2019. The top figure shows a projected increase in mean annual temperature over time, and the bottom figure shows an increase in the variability of annual precipitation over time. This means that severe drought like the one we experienced this summer is likely to occur more frequently in the Pacific Northwest. As we anticipate climate change in the future, we might need to think about aiming to increase the adaptive capacity of the site rather than returning to historical reference sites. The restoration community is already starting to think this way. Say we know the distribution of species by environment like this, where each line represents different plant species. And pre-restoration is an idea that you choose species that are likely to persist now and into the future as the environmental conditions change. We can think of this in terms of genotypes as well. For widespread species like most perennial grasses in the Great Basin, populations vary in distribution of genotypes across space. And this is why we see strong patterns of environment and phenotypic traits. For example, rapid seedling emergence and greater root allocation were found in warmer and drier locations. Harnessing this trait difference within the species, we could use populations that are pre-adapted to future environmental conditions. My research question is this: does selecting seeds from warmer and drier locations better prepare restored sites to drought? And my first expectation is that drought lower seedling survival, and 2, seedlings from warmer and drier locations have greater survival rate, even in drought, than seedlings from cooler and wetter locations. I decided to focus my research on the seedling stage because its survival is key to restoration success. Only less than 10% of the survival in perennial grass seeds is found when you seed them in the restored sites. And the main bottleneck is seeming to be the low seedling emergence after germination. So understanding how seed selection choices influence seedling survival is important for improving restoration outcomes. I'm conducting my research at the Northern Great Basin Experimental Range located in Harney County, Oregon. My target species is a native perennial grass called bottlebrush squirreltail. Its Latin name is Elamis elamoides, and has a very wide geographic range from British Columbia to Texas, and is well used in post-fire restoration for its high competitive ability with cheatgrass and its rapid growth to maturity. I obtained seeds from 6 locations across the Great Basin. To rank the seed provenance by climate, I used a multivariate analysis called principal coordinate analysis, or PCA, to collapse the climate variables. And then I used 30-year average values of annual precipitation, minimum and maximum temperature, and a vapor pressure deficit in the beginning and the end of the growing season. The X and Y axes show the first and second best models that explain the most variation across the 6 populations. And according to the X-axis, the horizontal axis, 3 variables most explain the variation, which are annual precipitation, maximum temperature, and vapor pressure deficit at the end of the growing season. So we can think of this X-axis from left to right as wet and cool to the right, it's dry to hot. So the populations, such as the purple ones on the wetter side and something on the drier end is the yellow population. In fall 2019, my lab mates helped me create these drought shelters that passively shield the rain throughout the year. And I set up a common garden experiment within these rainout shelters in a randomized block design. I have 3 rainfall treatments. In the ambient, I have no cover. In moderate drought plots, I have 50% cover. And in severe drought plots, I have 80% cover. And I made 8 blocks of these to add up to 24 plots. Last fall, I sowed 300 seeds of Elamis elamoides from each population in 2 subplots per plot. And I tracked the seedling emergence of Elamis elamoides in each subplot every month from March to July this year. Here I'm plotting time on the X and observed seedling stem counts each month on the Y. The treatments are colored. Yellow is ambient, the orange is moderate, and red is severe. I expect to see this hump-shaped curve where the seedling stem counts increase each month in the spring as it gets warmer and decreases as it dries out in the summer. And some seedlings die in the summer. And I expect to see highest stem counts in the ambient plots and lowest in the severe plots. Here's my data. I did see a hump-shaped curve in the ambient and moderate drought plots, but in contrary to what I expected, significantly more seedlings emerged in moderate drought plots than in ambient plots. And there was even higher emergence in severe drought plots in the spring. Another important result here is that the stem counts in the drought plots decline at a higher rate in the summer than in ambient plots. And this means a higher emergence rate in the stem in the spring comes at a risk of higher seedling mortality due to drought in the summer. And this summer was a particularly hot and dry summer. I'm puzzled by this result, but I have some leads to explain why. As you can see in these photos I took in February this year, I observed less snow accumulation under the drought shelters to the left, and then compared to the ambient plots to the right. I'm sorry, yeah. No, I said that wrong. The left photo is the ambient plot. The moderate and severe drought plots are on the right. The snow is obviously white, so it reflects the light and heat, while the dark brown color of the soil absorbs the light and heat. So perhaps less snow accumulation in the early spring under the drought shelters may have warmed the soil, thus advanced the germination timing in the drought shelters. This is a time series of soil temperature at 5 centimeters deep. And we have months on the X and daily mean soil temperature in Celsius on the Y. The cooler color is the ambient and the warmer colors are the shelters. If you look closely at the months of January to March when the seedlings germinate, that's when you see moderate and severe plots were over 0 degrees. So that's when the snow will be melting, while the ambient was cooler until March. Let's see how seed provenance may affect these curves. From left to right, I arranged the graphs by populations from wetter to drier locations. And I expected that seedlings from warmer and drier locations have greater survival rate in drought and seedlings from cooler and wetter locations. Instead, I found an opposite relationship where seeds from wetter locations had higher stem counts in moderate and severe drought than seeds from drier locations. And similarly, seeds from the wetter locations had a higher mortality. The slopes were steeper, so the mortality was higher in the summer. We can think of these seedlings from wetter locations as risk-taking populations because they opportunistically emerge in the spring and take the risk of potentially dying in the summer. On the other hand, the seedlings from drier locations are perhaps more conservative as they emerge less in the spring to evade the summer heat and and store their seeds in the seed bank until better conditions occur in later years. Range managers in this room are probably thinking, where does cheatgrass fit in this picture? And we're still figuring that out. I seeded 100 cheatgrass seeds in each subplot this fall, and I'm testing how multiple stressors like drought and cheatgrass have an effect on seedling survival. For any scientists in the room, we're thinking of this in terms of how cheatgrass fits in the stress gradient. Does cheatgrass put stress on the seedlings negatively on the same direction as the drought or in different direction? And I have some preliminary results to share from my greenhouse study that I did last year. I grew native grass in competition with cheatgrass in a wet and dry condition. And this is, again, the same PCA graph that I showed earlier, but these are seedling traits. And I color-coded the different treatments, the legends on the right side. So native grass seedlings grown in cheatgrass are represented by purple and blue, and they grouped separately from those grown with cheatgrass, red and green. And likewise, seedlings grown in wet conditions in purple and green were separate from those grown in dry conditions, blue and red. Notice that these groups all shift along the x-axis, and this is an indication that drought and cheatgrass competition point in the same direction along the stress gradient. What this means for management is that one, native grass seeds sown in cheatgrass dominated landscapes may be more vulnerable to water stress than in less invaded areas, which has huge implications for what traits we want to look out for when we select seeds for restoration. And two, high emergence rate in the spring risks the seedlings to have high seedling mortality in the summer. So third, if we were to be ready for more variable environment in the future, we might want to consider using seeds from both the risk-taking and conservative populations for restoration. More to come on this next summer. I'm excited to find out how the drought and cheatgrass competition effects interact and how field traits will shift with drought and cheatgrass competition. I'm also doing a germination trial this year with an undergrad mentee to figure out how or why we found seeds from wetter sites with high emergence in the spring. I would like to conclude my talk by first thanking my PhD advisor, Dr. Lauren Hallett, and my lab mates at the University of Oregon. I also would like to thank my colleagues at the Eastern Oregon Agricultural Research Center, and special thanks to Owen Bowman, Leah Prescott, and Susan Fritz for helping me find seeds for this experiment last fall. All of this work was not possible without the funding from the University of Oregon and the USDA. Thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions now.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation, Lina. That was really interesting. Really neat how the wetter seeds did better, which was opposite of what you hypothesized, I think. Is there any questions from the audience? We'll give you a minute to type them out in the chat, or feel free to come off mute and speak directly to Lina.
Hi, Lina. This is Tom Maxwell from Lincoln University in New Zealand. Thanks for your presentation. Just got a couple of questions that may not be or may be in your radar with regards to your discussion when you come to write up. But the first one is, are you going to look at the surviving population of seedlings across those treatments? Because it seemed like in your graphs there, the sort of residual population that survived at the end was quite similar for whether they were risk takers or conservative. And I know you, in your future directions, you've said, you know, I'm going to look at second year seedling emergent survival. That was the first one. The second one was, how does the ambient treatment for your, you know, soil moisture and whatnot compare to a long-term average for the site? Is that ambient, you know, representative of what you've had for the last 60 or 100 years, or is that itself quite plastic because of climate change? Those are my two questions.
Thank you. So the first question was, am I looking at survival next summer? And I am. This is a good question because as of last, or this July, most of the population seemed to have about the same seedling counts. So I am curious how they survived the winter and the next season. And it is very important for restoration to take into account of how they grow from seedling to adulthood. Yeah, second year data is coming next year. In terms of ambient soil moisture level, so I'm measuring soil moisture at the 5 centimeter depth, and I don't have like a long-term soil moisture data to compare to at the site, but perhaps I'm missing it. I should look into it. I know it's considerably a hot, you know, dry summer, so I'm assuming that my ambient plots are actually more in the drier side if you look at the long-term average. So yeah, that's a good point that I should compare my ambient plots with my other studies that have looked at soil moisture. Thanks.
Okay, all the best with it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your question, Tom. Is there any other questions that we have from the audience?
I have a question.
Awesome, go for it.
Okay, my question sort of came out at the beginning of your presentation when you're talking about not necessarily restoring to the traditional conditions, but looking forward to what will be current and future conditions to try and make the landscape more resilient to climate change and what have you. So I'm wondering where you feel we lie in starting to introduce species that are not part of our traditional landscape, as far as like, yeah, it like, you know, at some point we're going to be in a completely different zone, and we're going to need different species there. Where's your moral compass on that? Where is your scientific compass? How far in the future do you think that's going to be happening?
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, that's, I think, an actively debated area in science. So the idea of moving another species out of its current range is this is my opinion, is a little risky. So I wouldn't recommend it just now, but that is an active part of the research that others are doing. And my presentation I did today, I'm thinking about moving species that are in its current range, but populations out of its range. So these species are occurring in this area, but the populations somewhere else that have the better adaptive capacity might be able to do better in the future conditions. So just kind of moving, I bet, you know, grasses and forbs and those wind dispersed species are able to migrate on their own. But if these climate changes are happening at a rapid rate, we might not be able to catch up. So in restoration, we might want to consider using within range, but different populations of the same species.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Lisa. Does anybody else have any questions? We have a couple minutes left.
I have a question that's along the same line as Lisa's. I'm Tim at UBC in Kelowna, British Columbia. I was also taken with your sort of introductory comment about the reference sites and places of they're changing, I think you said. And my question, and I'll follow up with the detail, but my question is like, you know, what else in addition to what you were just talking about with regard to Lisa, what goes into the conceptual thinking about how to use those reference points, you know, for you? Because I was thinking in the other direction, they're sort of snapshots in dynamic time too at their origin. Most of them in North America are from about 1918 to the 1990s. And most of them were created because someone observed that something was changing, right? Something was changing rapidly or had previously just changed. And then they make these reference points. And so they're sort of like, they're these physical snapshots in time, you know? And so we don't necessarily know that the reference point is the reference point. You know what I mean? Anyway, so I'm asking about your conceptual thinking about that too.
So if I'm understanding right, if you're thinking about future environment, what is that reference point? Yeah, that's a hard one to know. And I think, yeah, if we don't want those seedlings to fail in say like the northern part of the native grass range is too cold for any of the southern range populations to grow, then maybe that's too far of the reference point, and we might want to kind of test at what point would it be able to withstand the cold in the winter and the hot in the summer. So I would say it would have to be tested. And I don't have a great answer here for the target species that I selected now, but yeah, I think it's important for us to know how the seedlings would do in the winter and the summer. Those are the two stress points that I can think of. So
thank you.
Thanks for your question, Tim. Thank you so much, Lina, for your presentation. I'll do one last call for any quick questions, but other than that, we are out of time. So last call for questions. Okay, hearing none, I think we'll wrap up for today. Thank you so much, Lina. You did a great job presenting and addressing all of those questions you got. Just so everyone knows this, I recorded the session. It will be posted to YouTube, and Rachel's presentation from last week, I lost the recording, thanks to technology. So anyways, it got re-recorded. Rachel was gracious enough to re-record her presentation. So I'll also be posting that this afternoon. So yeah, you can check out our YouTube channel, BC Chapter SRM, to see the recordings, as well as all of last year's webinar series is posted. So once again, thanks Lina, and thanks for everyone for attending. And we will see you next week.